Hey, welcome to Flight Test. I'm Josh. Today we're going to be showing you how to build the FT Spear. Now, if you haven't seen the release video for the FT Spear, it's basically a mashup of a lunchbox with wings. The goal of this FT Spear is to give you the ability to have lots and lots of equipment without lots and lots of clutter. So the idea is that you can grow with you from line of sight to FPV to hopefully full autonomous systems and long range systems in the future. Now, if you haven't ever built with us before, we have free plans that are available to download. The link is down below, but we also have speed build kits to make the building experience much quicker and simpler. This build can be done in under 2.5 hours if you use the speed build kit. Now would be a really good time also to center up your servos. We're only going to need 2 of them for this build. It's also very important at this point to build your power pod. Now this power pod is dimensioned the exact same as our classic swappable power pods, but it's much shorter and unfortunately is not swappable. So there's a link down below that you can go to build this before, but just to let you know, it's still the 8-fold. The only difference is it's a little bit shorter. And the firewall is going to go on the side of the narrow notch. Another thing we did a little bit different here is you can do the traditional X mount, but you can also use the hardware inside of your motor kit if you're getting the C-Pack and actually screw it through the back. Now you'll see the 4 little drops of hot glue. That's because even though I use Loctite, I wanted to make sure everything was locked down nice and secure because this section is going to be very hard to get to in the future. Along with building our power pod, now would be a really good time to make sure it's turning in the proper direction. To do this, we're going to simply hook this up to our receiver that's already been bound to our transmitter, and we're going to make sure it runs the way we want our prop. Now typically what you want is you want your prop to run in a way that's going to cause it to spin in a way that's always going to keep the nut tight. If you only have a standard prop, you're going to want it to spin in a way that makes the nut loose when you're in a pusher configuration. So let's go ahead and get our materials in order and we'll get started. In this portion of the build, we're going to be joining our wing halves, gluing together our spars, installing the spars, gluing over our wing folds to make our airfoil, and also installing our rear wooden wing spar. So the first thing we're going to start on is also the biggest thing, and that's going to be the wings. So let's go ahead and punch out our wing panels, and we're going to be taping these together. Now that we have our wing panels, we're going to go ahead and flip them over so the score cuts are facing down. Using 2 small pieces of tape, we're going to carefully line this up so the leading edge and the trailing edge of the wing panel line up perfectly. Take your time on this step and get it perfect. Once you're happy with the fit, we're going to tack it in place with 2 small pieces of tape and then go over it with a big piece of tape. Now I have the tape a little long on both sides. That's for a special reason, and we'll show you in just a moment. But let's go ahead and flip this over 180 degrees, and we're going to put glue along our seams. Now if everything lined up okay, you should see that these edge marks line up perfectly. We're going to go ahead and open this up, and we're going to put a nice healthy bead right in the center section. With the hot glue, it's very easy to burn through the tape, so be careful. Now we're going to lay this flat, and if we put enough glue in, you're going to see it squeeze out. That's exactly what we want. We're going to come back with a piece of scrap, and we're going to smear it smooth. Now I'm going to hold this flat against the table because it's very important with wings that they're not warped. Give this about 1.5 minutes to dry. Once everything's thoroughly dried, we can go ahead and fold over the front and the trailing edge. While everything is nice and flat, now would be a really good time to do some reinforcement before we move further. We're going to go ahead and take our thick 2-inch tape and we're going to place it on this back edge on both sides of the inside of the wing and the outside of the wing. For added reinforcement, we're going to go ahead and add a 2-inch piece of tape just on the trailing edge, right at the very back of the wing. What this is really used for is to give rigidity, so if you do hit going down, it doesn't cause any cracks to go in the corner of the wings. We're going to do this on both sides. All right, right on the back. You can use extreme packing tape with the cords if you want. I have really good luck just with some heavy duty 2-inch packing tape. All right, now that our tape reinforcement's done, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards cutting our double bevels on the leading edges. Make sure you have a nice sharp razor blade for this. You can also do this without the use of razor blades. Check out our video of building without razor blades. We'll have a link down below for you. So for a double bevel here, I'm going to hold this up to the camera so you can see it. We're not going to want to cut 90 degrees. We're going to want to turn our razor blade nice and long, have it nice and sharp, and we're going to focus the back edge of the razor just on one side of the paper at a nice acute angle like you see here. And then we're simply going to let it glide through. You don't have to get it perfect the first time. Don't worry about that. You can always go back and trim off a little bit more. If you go through the center section, don't worry. You can also repair that with tape. Now you see how easy that glided through? A lot of people ask, we use Olfa blades. They stay very sharp. It's Japanese steel. It's a really good blade. It's also very economical. All right, one more time. Double bevel. Now I'm doing this for the camera for you. Generally, I have this laying on the table. It's always nice to take a scrap piece of foam. If you've never tried this before, if this is your first foam board build, practice on a scrap piece of foam on the table, get nice and comfortable, and always look ahead of the blade to make sure you're not going towards your hands or your fingers. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. This time I'm going to go ahead and do it on the table for you, just so you can see how it's done. So once again, we're going to keep our blade not at a 90-degree angle, but at a very acute angle, and we're going to glide it through just above the paper. Flip it over, do the same process. Once you've built a couple of these models, it'll be no problem. You'll be really good at it. Our last step before putting our spars together, we're going to go ahead and cut out our little holes right here for the spar to tab through. So let's go ahead and put our wing panel aside and put our attention towards the spars. Now that our wing is ready to receive its spars, we're going to go ahead and build all 4 spars at the same time. Now it may seem weird, like there's an extra spar, but you'll see why in a second. The first thing to do is to clear out the foam in the areas we need so we can get the proper A-folds. Now what A is the side plates are above the bottom plate. And we're going to show you that just in a second. But first, let's go ahead and clear out the cavities here, 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 and on both sides right here. Generally, if you see a cavity about the width of the foam, it usually indicates that you want to remove that foam down to the paper on the lower side. Now, if you have a piece of sandpaper or a concrete floor, here's a really cool trick that you can use to make it so your razor blade won't cut through the paper. Go down to the floor and just drag it at the same angle you're going to cut the foam about 10 times. If you did it right, you're going to see a nice dull edge right here. Take a scrap piece of foam and just test it out. No cut, all the way to the paper. So now we can take that razor blade and we can go ahead and trace over these edges and go all the way down to the paper. I still wouldn't recommend pushing too hard, but you're going to get a nice cut all the way. The biggest thing is you want to preserve the exact same angle that you're cutting with. Once you have those score lines, fold it 180 degrees, and simply roll it off. The cleaner you can make this, the better. So take your time, and if you have any extra, just scrape it out with a knife until it's nice and clean. This is one of the fundamental building blocks of all of our designs, is that we love folding the aircraft together, kind of like flying origami, but also it makes the sides and everything line up very nicely. We're going to go ahead and do this on all 4 of our pieces. So just as a point of reference, go ahead and study these 4 pieces and make sure that your pieces look exactly like they do right here. So all 4 of these spars are A-folds, and as we talked about before, an A-fold looks just like this diagram if it was a cross section. A-fold is where the side cheeks are above the bottom plate. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to focus our glue mainly on this area right here. So when we use the table as our friend, we put the side plate down, we rotate this up, all the glue that we just put on is going to the part that's structural, not the paper. So let's go ahead and dry our first one. Make sure that we're going to start about a ½ inch in from each side so the glue doesn't get too sloppy, and we're going to focus the majority of that glue right on the foam. So Stop about a 1/2 inch from the edge. Take it down to the table. Rotate it up 90 degrees. It's a really good idea. The more square you build an airplane, the better everything fits together. So I always keep this little square with me so we can hold it right up against the table. If you don't have a square, a roll of 2-inch packing tape works really good as well. All right, we'll repeat the same process on the other side. With every glue joint, I like to hum "You Are My Sunshine" in my head. It gives me just about enough time to let the glue dry properly. Now you're going to hear me say a lot of times the table is your friend. I mean every bit of that. I use the table all the time as an extra set of hands, but also as a way to square everything up. If you try to do things while you're holding it, oftentimes things will be crooked. So anytime you can use the table to have a fold, have an angle, hold a glue joint, do it. All right, same process on the other spar. One fold at a time, focusing on the foam, stopping about a 1/2 inch from each side. A lot of people want to know what kind of glue guns we use. We use the AdTech Pro 200. And also on our store, we have hot glue sticks that are the exact same price as what you'd find at Packetans or Walmart or a craft store. But we've worked with a lot of different formulas. It's dark white, but that's because there's a lot of binding agents in it. It sticks really well to the white craft foam and also our water resistant foam that you see here. All right, the spars are done. Let's go ahead and do the center spars. So this for the center section, I want this paper to stick. So I'm going to put a very light ribbon of glue. I'm going to put my glue gun very much like 90 degrees to the paper and put a very thin ribbon right down the edge. Now, since it's a fold, I'm going to go back and focus little drops of glue on here. On an A-fold, the side goes against the table, the bottom rotates up 90 degrees. Be careful when you have a lot of holes going through the foam, not to manhandle it too much or you're going to get wrinkles. It's not going to do anything bad, it's just going to look ugly. All right, we'll repeat the same process on the other side. Very thin ribbon of glue right on the paper, holding about 90 degrees, keeping that glue really thin, and then little drops on the foam for the strength. Back on the table, up 90 degrees. Keep me honest, I'm going to go ahead and use the square. We have one last spar to do. By this time you should be a pro, and if at any time that you have to go back, it's always a good idea, especially if you have a speedboat kit, to trace your parts. That way if you don't need to make another kit, you can always share it with a friend. All right, I'm getting a little low on glue. We always want to monitor our glue levels, but I have just enough for this. This last piece, nothing different, A-fold. And our last fold coming up right here. Once again, side going down, rotating 90 degrees and pressing against the table, holding it 90 degrees. Don't just push it until the foam gets tight. Really concentrating on getting it exactly to 90 degrees. All right, now comes the fun part. We get to install the spars on our wing, and we're going to go ahead and start with our center section here. So you're going to notice that there's only tabs on one side, and we have a nice etch mark. A big thank you to Dan Sponholz for drawing our plans. If you're scratch building along with us, this will be a blue indicator line. We're going to go ahead and just do a quick test fit. This should pressure fit right inside those slots and be nice and centered, just like that. Once we're happy with that fit, let's go ahead and lift it up. And we don't need to put glue on the raised areas because those go down towards the bottom. We only want to put it on the low areas. So I'm going to put a nice healthy bead of glue, about 3/16 of an inch, 3 or 4 millimeters. Nope, I just did the cardinal no-no. Ran out of glue. I'm going to go ahead and trace here. Leave this part alone, back down, back down. Flip it over 180 degrees. Always keep an eye on where your glue can drip and burn you. You want to be very careful. Anytime you're gluing something special like a spar, you really want to give it plenty of time to dry so it's nice and strong, but most importantly, straight. Now that our center spar is in, we're going to go ahead and make sure that we line up the proper spars for both sides. It's going to line up perfectly with this. But while we're lining up this hole, we're also going to keep it exactly on both sides of this etch, as you see right here. So put our attention towards this area here and the center of the hole. It'll be perfect. All right, we're happy with that fit. I'm not going to put any glue immediately around this. I'm going to put a couple stripes here, and then I'm going to just get a nice zigzag right down the side. Now once again, concentrating and keeping it between the two edge cuts. That'll be red on your plans. We're going to kind of smear it around, ultimately ending up with where this servo hole lines up perfectly. We're going to do the exact same process on the other side. All right, give these about a minute to dry. All right, now that the spars are fully dried, we're gonna go ahead and start practicing our wing fold. Now, we're gonna lightly kind of bend this over, and you're gonna notice that these need a little bit of help. We're just gonna go ahead and tell it where to crease. We're not gonna crease it on its own. If you have to go ahead and try to make it crease, go back with a light barbecue skewer and trim them. What we should see is after we crease this over nice and light, that these line up almost perfectly. If it's a little off, don't worry about it. And that we have a nice airfoiled shape here. The ultimate goal is that this section here that we glued our spar in should be parallel to the lower surface of the wing. You can tell that by just simply pushing down on it. If it has a lot of bounce, you know that there's something wrong. You may need to put a little bit more bend in this front crease right here. That feels real nice, but we don't want to go ahead and just leave these open. We want to put glue in this. And this is also very much different than the old VersaWing days, where I used to tell you to drag a piece through here and open it up. We've adjusted our lasers now to give a really nice etch, and also on the instructions, the indicator of cutting halfway through gives a really nice crease. There's no need to open them up even more, and as a matter of fact, it actually makes it a little bit weaker and the airframe doesn't last as long. So now that we're happy with this fold, we're gonna repeat that spot, but before we do, we're gonna put our glue gun straight down with the nozzle pushing in and pump a light ribbon of glue. Now if this is your first time, just do one at a time like this. And then go over, get your fold, go back and make sure that this is where you want it, and make sure that this looks nice and even. If you have this portion over here, that means that this area here is perfect. Give this about 30 seconds and we're gonna do this process again until all these creases have a nice ribbon of glue pumped into them. Once you get used to it, you'll be able to go ahead and do all three at once, but don't do that until you've done a couple builds. You can see that this is nice and strong now. I'm just gonna go ahead and do the other two sides right now. This AdTech Pro 200, the reason we like it so much is you can't outuse the glue. You can't make it cool down. But if you leave it plugged in for a long time, it will develop air bubbles in its chamber, and you gotta outgas it by pointing the nozzle up and squirting out some glue. All right, we're gonna hold this down. I'm putting my finger on the trailing edge here and holding this whole surface down and making sure the spar is where we want it. All right, now that we're happy with that, we can go ahead and check our fits, make sure everything feels really good, and let's go ahead and complete this half of the wing before moving on to the other half. All right, we're gonna go ahead and start, and we're gonna leave this back edge open. If you have experience with this, you can do all three of these steps at one time. I'll show you on this side how to do it, where if you're new to this, on the other side, I'll go ahead and just do all three at once and show you how to hold it. All right, so first we're gonna start with a nice heavy bead of glue right on the leading edge, right in that double bevel. A healthy bead of glue over 3/16 of an inch, right on the spar. And at this point, we could put a bead of glue here, but we're not gonna. I'll show you how to put glue in that afterwards. With this flat against the table, all of our attention's now gonna go right over the spar. Don't worry about what this trail edge does because there's no glue. Just hold down over the spar. Give this about a minute and a half of drying time. All right, just to give you guys a visual here, what I'm gonna look for is when you release it, look down the inside here. If you see this center section, that spar, pop up, you know the glue's not dried, hold it for a little bit longer. The one thing you don't want to see is the spar popping up. It'll change your airfoil and change your flying characteristics. Once you're happy and it's thoroughly dried, we're going to flip this over and you're going to see we have a little bit of a lifted edge. That's totally normal because this is a very sharp angle. This is very light. But what we want to do is we want to go ahead and open this up just a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and squeeze as we pull this through all the way to the end. And I'm just putting a nice ribbon, about 3/16 of an inch of glue. I'm going to just show this. Okay. So once we placed our glue down, we're going to go ahead and place it with flat bottom, and we're going to hold it from the top edge, making sure that we put extra pressure on this portion here to keep it down nice and tight. Make sure your whole wing surface is nice and flush with the bottom of the table. Now that we're done with this side of the wing, we're going to go ahead and do the left side of the wing. So as before, we're going to flip this around. We're going to fold this over, establish our wing curve. Looks really good, looks just like the other side. Now I got plenty of hot glue. I'm going to put a thin ribbon of glue down in the crease. I'm going to do all three this time. Down in the crease, down in the crease. Don't do this step if you have a low output glue gun. Do one at a time. While we're holding this down, we can kind of compare, make sure that this side is the same height as this side. Just do it visually. Good indicators is looking at the gap that you'd have on your spar, like in this area here, things like that. Now that we're happy with the way everything looks, we got plenty of glue. We're going to focus our glue right down in the double bevel on both sides of the spar, on the trailing edge back here, Let's go ahead and put a little bit of glue right here. This is going to lock it down on that main spar for us. Now these two little tabs here are really important. This is actually what keeps under positive level pressure, you're fine. Everything's going to compress. But whenever your wing goes down, this area is a good spot, especially on the arrow where it would crack. Because we have extra room here, we have the luxury of putting a center spar in here, and these little tabs are actually going to be able to keep it from cracking this way. So if you don't have a little extra glue squeaking out here, just make sure you have plenty of glue here. Press that down until it's thoroughly dry. Make sure there's no problems with adhesion on these spots here. Our last step in this section of the build is going to be to install our spar. Now if you're scratch building at home, you can use a paint stick, but in our kit and also available in our store is this little complete hardware kit. Here's your spar. Now we're going to put our spar on the very back edge, just like you see right here. This is going to give you added rigidity and strength. Now anytime you're putting hot glue, if you put it on the wood, it's going to cool very quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put it on the foam. I'm just going to turn this up so you guys can see it very easily. Keep in mind, when you put the stick down, you're not going to have much time to work it. So get it up there, maybe 5 seconds, and it's already pretty much dry. Tight compression. We're going to go ahead and put the secondary spar to the side right now. That's going to come in play in a few steps later. This portion of the wing is now done. We're ready to move on to the next step, which is putting our doubler on the bottom of the wing. In this portion of the build, we're going to be building the center section. Now that center section includes the bottom plate, the side pieces, the secondary spar, our wraparound nose, and also all of our hatch detail. To get our bottom plate ready, we're going to go ahead and remove the foam pieces all along these edges here, and then this double portion here. Same technique as before. Make sure that if you added it or cracked off the razor blade that you redull that tip. You definitely don't want to go through the paper on the other side. This water-resistant paper sticks really, really well to the foam. Generally, with the craft style foam board, you really don't even need to do this step, but it always helps to get a nice, clean release from the paper. Rather than tearing, we're just kind of cracking, getting it all started. And then when you go back again, it just rolls right off. It's a little bit thicker, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult. There's one. And there's two. Go ahead and take a moment to study this here. Make sure all your pieces are removed and all the cavities look just like they do here. You're going to notice that this is no part of an A fold or a B fold. This is really aesthetic, just to kind of make the wing look very, very nice. So we're going to go and put our attention towards here. With this is just a cover up here. I'm going to focus my glue right at the point where the paper meets the foam and put a very thin ribbon. Once I have that thin ribbon down, I'm going to use the table as my friend. I'm going to rotate this up 90 degrees and hold it there. Every 15 seconds or so, give it a little move back and forth because you're going to have a little glue squeeze out and you don't want to glue it to the table. If it does glue to the table, just rock it until it comes free. I'm going to roll off any extra little glue balls, and we'll do the exact same process on the other side. This lower plate doubler is as much for aesthetics as it is for strength. I really like the idea, since this is going to be laying on its belly, to have a lot of rigidity on the bottom. Now that we have our little side covers done, we're going to go ahead and do an A-fold. Now I just put in the diagram, we only have one side of the A-fold, so we're just going to make it look just like that. Here's our side plate, here's our bottom plate. So just do a practice fold real quick, make sure we got it down where we need it, and we're always going to focus our majority of our glue on the part that brings us the structure. So that's going to be right here on this foam. About 1/4 inch from each end. Side plate going against the table, bottom plate rotating up to 90 degrees. And then in this one especially, hold the 90. Now would be a really good time to bring our main wing section back in, because we're going to go ahead and install it on the wing. But first we want to do a dry fit. The way this doubler is going to go is it's going to slide. And the paper here and here is just going to kind of friction fit up against it. So we want this nice and tight against the back, centered up on the section. And then also, I put a little indicator line that'll either be on your plans or on your speedboat kit right here. We want to make sure that indicator line lines up right in the center here so it's as square as possible, because your lower plate is going to wrap around off of that and you want it nice and square. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave this here right now. That way we kind of have a good reference. We don't have to manage it too much. I'm also going to put an extra stick of hot glue in my glue gun. And this doesn't have to have every square inch covered, but we're going to go ahead and start with the perimeter and do a couple zigzags down in the middle. So I'm going to go right along the back edge here, up the side, wiggle my glue gun down in there. Just a couple of zigzags back in here. Now before we put a lot of pressure on here, let's make sure that we're nice and perpendicular. First we're going to focus our energy towards the back, that's centered up, and now bring it up. Here's our indicator line, here's this. Let's take it to the table and press it flat. Give this about a minute or so of pressing nice and flat. You really want this to be straight and true. Now the bottom plate is in place. We're going to go ahead and put our attention towards these side plates. These side plates are located in our kit, and they look just like this right here. So just as we did before, we're going to go ahead and do a test fit. And what we should have, and if you have to trim a little bit, no worries, especially if you're scratch building. You should see a nice friction fit here, going right down to the bottom. And one thing I do notice here, and you'll probably have to do it too, is this edge here, because it folds at an awkward angle, you're not really cutting the paper, but you're cutting this little sliver of foam. You can compress it. It's a lot easier just to cut it off on both sides. You can see this portion got crushed because of my plywood. Just a little bit fat. Just go ahead and open this up a little bit. Everyone's wing in these sections is going to be just a little bit different, a little bit of custom trimming. It'll generally be within the millimeter, but feel free to make any little adjustments just to get everything as square and proper as possible. And during these times, keep this guy very handy to really keep it nice and tight. Okay, we're happy with the fit. I'm going to go ahead and glue this down now. And to glue this down, we're going to focus a nice healthy bead of glue on the very bottom here, top of the spar, all the way back. And then I'm going to come over here. I'm going to go ahead and just put a nice drop of glue right down along that paper. And I'm also going to put some glue here and here. Make sure when you're holding this that it doesn't drip down and hit you. All right, now I'm going to press this in just as we did before. And I'm going to make sure that both sides, when I push this down, both sides are against the bottom plate of the wing. I hate to say this, but you're going to hold this for about 2 minutes. Once the glue is thoroughly dried, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side. Let's go ahead and just give it a quick fit. Make any adjustments that we need to. I'm just going to go ahead and trim this out just a little bit. It feels really good. Back edge is down, front edge is down there. Once those are thoroughly dried, we'll go ahead and put a little scrap piece of foam nearby. Make sure you have plenty of glue and put a nice healthy bead pumping that glue down into that cavity, if there is any. And we're going to come back, squeegee it smooth. We'll do that on both sides of the wing. That joint between that and the glue tab on the top spar is going to be what keeps your wing strong in negative G conditions. So once again, we're going to focus our glue tip right at the cavity, put a nice bead of glue focusing right inside there. We'll come right back because extra glue does not mean extra strength, and squeegee off the excess. Now the side plates are glued nice and square. We're going to go ahead and do a quick test fit. And these guys will just be what we call a C-fold or a fold over. C for cover. And that looks really good. So we're going to focus some glue right on the paper here. That's on the bottom plate. And then I'm also going to come back here, put a little ribbon of glue right in that cavity for it to squeeze up against. Fold that over, pinch it nice and tight. And then you can even take a scrap piece of foam and just make sure that this top edge here stays nice and true. The reason I'm not using my finger is because it's very hot, because there's hot glue inside there, and that paper transmits the heat right on through there. Do the exact same process on the other side. Fold it on over. So now it's time to bring back our secondary spar. Now this secondary spar is going to fit right in between here. And we're going to go ahead and want to adjust this. It's purposely about 1/4 of an inch long, so you're going to need to adjust this unless you're scratch building and it came out just perfectly. The reason we do this is everyone folds these center wings just a little bit different. We want plenty of room for adjustment to have a nice tight fit. Tight fits or strong fits. So we're going to take about the thickness of a foam mount. The worst thing we want is for this to be loose. Here. If we did our job right, it should slide right down and look nice and square. This is going to give you even more rigidity as far as on positive G's and negative G's. All right, I'm happy with the fit. I just want to point out here that both these sides are the same except one exception. 2 small holes right here, and that's going to be to help you line up your mini power pod. Now when I say mini power pod, I don't mean mini power pod as in Mighty Minis. I mean it's a simple power pod shaped to the same dimensions, but it's cut short and unfortunately it's not swappable. So this portion here is going to go towards the back. So now that we've test fitted it, we're going to focus our glue on the very bottom here. Nice healthy bead on both sides. And then also, we're going to put the glue on the foam because as we talked about before, the wood's going to make it dry very quickly. So you want to make sure that you're very comfortable. Ah, there's that hot glue. So we're going to slide this down in and we're going to pinch both sides while making sure it's seated firmly against the bottom plate of the wing. Now that the secondary spar is on, we're going to trace the outer perimeter on both sides with a nice bead of glue. Keep a piece of scrap foam ready just to get off the excess. Keep your foam really, or your glue really thin on the very top surface because that's going to be really important to keep it clear for our top skin. Give it a good minute and a half to let it dry. Now that our secondary spar is glued in, we're going to go ahead and test fit our doublers. These doublers provide an amazing amount of strength for the top skin as it wraps around. That looks good. We're going to want to notch this in, and we should see it just touch the back and have a nice foam thickness all the way from the bottom plate around to here. Once you're happy with that fit, don't put the glue here. Put the glue here so we know exactly where it needs to be. And also keep it about a 1/2 inch inside. You don't want this squeezing out and causing problems. I'm just going to put a little bit of glue on this very bottom too. All right, we're going to rotate this up and hold it in place. Once this is dried, we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process on the other side. The most important thing we want to make sure is we want to really focus to make sure that this gap is roughly the thickness of the foam on both the top and the bottom. Taking extra time to get fits like this just right is going to make your build experience so much better and your airframe look so much nicer. So now would be a good time to go ahead and put our main wing section aside. It's because we're going to work on the sub-assembly that's going to go inside of it. This area here is for holding the FPV gear and also gives the nose a tremendous amount of strength. So let's go ahead and clear out these cavities. Again, a good rule of thumb, if it's twice the thickness or the single thickness, generally it's getting removed. If you're scratch building, Dan Sponholz did a really good job of using hash marks and indicators to really give you guidelines on how to build this. So go ahead and take a moment, study this piece and make sure your piece looks exactly like it. Once you're happy with that, we're going to go and move on to this next step. We're going to go and do a test fit, but you're going to notice when I sit this sideways that you actually have one piece shorter than the other that gives it the slope. That's because when this folds together, we want it to line up with this right here. So don't be alarmed, and especially don't make this square where it's sagging on the top. So let's go ahead and do that piece now while we're talking about it. Nice bead of glue on the paper, make sure you don't burn yourself, and then glue on the top piece right here. We're going to fold this over 180 degrees. This is technically called a C-fold. And in this case, table's my friend, but this way. I'm going to give the pinch pressure, and we're going to make sure that this top here has that nice angle. It's not the end of the world if it doesn't. It just fits much nicer if it does. Once you have that fit, this is going to be our first B-fold. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't put a B stencil on here because we just covered up the bottom plate. So the B-fold is where the side plate is beside the bottom plate, just like this. So the bottom plate is staying on the ground, the side plate moves up. Exact opposite of the A-fold. We'll place our glue once again on the foam for structure. Back on the table. This time the side plate goes up and hold at 90 degrees and let it seat down. If you ever have a little glue squeeze out like that, just wait about halfway through the drying cycle and then move it away. You can easily scrape that up later. Anytime you have little glue globs on your table, they put dents in your airframe. All right, same process on the other side. Focusing the glue right on the foam. Bottom plate's on the side, or bottom plate's on the table, side plate moves up. Hold it at 90 degrees. So far, all these techniques that we've just walked through can be found in our FT Tiny Trainer and also our FT Sparrow. The reason I'm bringing these up now, if you're new to this hobby and especially new to building foam board airplanes, it may be beneficial for you to practice on those. They're very easy scratch build kits, also very affordable speed build kits. And they'll teach you all the principles you need to know on good build techniques. Now that we have this built, we're going to put it aside. So this piece that you see right here is actually our nose piece and our top hatch. And we're going to go ahead and remove this outer edges here. And then we're going to remove the paper on this whole entire surface. Now this brown paper grips really well, and I'm going to show you a technique to make it a little bit easier. But don't get upset if you can't remove every square inch. Just get as much off as you can, and don't dig into the paper or the foam with any sharp objects and ding it. So I'm just going to trace this out with my razor blade. We're simply going to rock it right out. You can see I don't try to just get it off of one big chunk. I crack the whole surface loose and then roll it out the second time around. This one here I'll just kind of hold in my hand. All right, I'm going to go ahead and lay this on the table. Go ahead and take a moment to study it. Make sure it looks just like that. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and remove our foam. Now there's a couple ways you can do that. You can use a triangle like this and pull it against it, or you can use the edge of your table. You can notice here it's immediately very difficult to scrape this up, like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this edge very, very carefully. I'm not even going to be able to do that. Get as much of it as delicately as possible. We told them to give us the best adhesion possible, and they certainly did. Now if I hold this against the table and pull up, you're going to find it comes off. This is kind of at this point like removing wallpaper. The adhesion on this brown paper is ridiculous. Even after staying underwater for 24 hours, it doesn't come off. So take your time. Sometimes you'll get it all at once. Other times it'll look just like this. Another easy way is just take a ruler or square. Just walk it on back. There we go, that looks pretty good. Like I said, this paper sticks incredibly well. Adams did a really good job with the bond. Sometimes you do have to work a little bit harder to get it off. Now, if you're scratch building, everyone has a different grain to their foam. What we found of ours, if you want to get a nice sharp round bed, you're going to be working with a 20-inch length. So our normal foam board is 20 inches by 30 inches. On the foam board, if you're scratch building this, cut it out in the orientation like this. So this is within the 20-foot length or 20-inch length. Here's your 30 inches here. That's going to give you the extrusion grain running this way, which is going to enable you to get a nice bend. So with our wing flipped over on its back, we're going to go ahead and focus on using this surface here to key in our bottom plate. And it should just fit in just like a glove like this. The important thing is we want to pull this all the way back so it seats up tight against this back edge. Once we're happy with the fit, we'll go to our tape, and we're going to put a nice tape hinge right on this far edge, just like you see here. Now this tape can be left on or it can be removed later, whatever you wish. I'm going to slide this up against it, pulling right around the center section. Tape this right on just like you see here. Now if I flip this over, what I should see is a nice even hinge that goes up just inside as you see like this. I'm going to go ahead and kind of do it backwards to how you'll probably end up doing it, just so you can see on the camera, but I'm going to go ahead and work this around slowly just to start getting that foam to kind of realize how it needs to bend and get that memory in it. So go ahead and hold it like this for about 30 seconds. Let everything kind of naturally bend, but you'll see how nice it takes that curve when you do it with the grain. If you're bending this and you realize it's really choppy, most likely you cut it against the grain. I'd strongly recommend go back, trace out the piece again, and cut it 90 degrees from the orientation you currently cut it out with, and it'll probably bend like a champ. You can look for a lot of our new designs in the future that normally require poster board around the turtle deck, having foam board instead. Because of the way this takes a curve so nice, we're really excited to show you some future designs coming up soon. Okay, now that we have that bend, we know exactly where we need to go. It's going to be right to this edge right here. So our first step and our first glue joint on this journey is going to be to just basically get it glued like here. So we're going to open this up 180 degrees. We're not going to stress about that glue joint. And we're going to go ahead and paste a lot of glue right on the bottom here, right on the paper, and then just before the edge here on the paper, and then we're also going to go ahead and put a very healthy bead of glue on both here, mainly if it's a speedboat kit, because that speedboat kit oftentimes has a little bit of an undercut. All right, now this time I have to kind of come around to the side here. We're going to hold plenty of pressure down right on this section here. And I'm just going to hold with my hand up. Just hold this up so it likes to kind of go where it needs to. The thing we want to look at very closely is we want to make sure that this portion of the paper is nice and tight against the side plate of the blunt nose here. And you can get that tighter by holding this down and kind of pulling it just a little bit and then holding it in place. Go back and forth to both sides and make sure both sides look the exact same, and also that nothing's wandering out or moving around on you. You're going to give this about 2 minutes holding it here like this, so don't rush this. Hum a couple songs, put on some music, watch a couple commercials. So now before we go the rest of the way here, we're going to go ahead and put our attention towards this. Now right around the center, which is 2-inch mark, we're going to just leave a little mark. That's going to be our center area. This portion here is going to fit down right against this bottom plate. It's going to sit against the white foam, and it's going to butt up against the brown foam. This is going to expose the two cavities where if you're making a long range machine, you can actually parallel your batteries together and they fit this way. And this area here is going to be for your GoPro, your Session, your Run Cam, or your board camera, or all of it. So once we're happy with that fit, we're going to put some glue down, and we're only going to repeat the same process as we did before. On the flats. And then I'm going to focus a little bit of glue right on that back edge here so this has something to stick to on the brown foam. Now, there's no law saying that you have to put it smack dab in the center. I would recommend it. But if you have some application where you need to make this a different size or offset it, go ahead and do that now. I'm just going to kind of smear that up there. Give that about 1.5 minutes to dry. All right, our 2 minutes is up. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next step. At any point you see that something doesn't look right, go ahead and fix it now, because it's only going to compound itself as we wrap this further down. So if you have kind of glue globs that are kind of making a big dent or kind of kicking things aside, cut them out now, move them, or you can actually heat them up and get rid of them. All right, I got an extra glue stick here because we're definitely going to need it. We're going to now take this whole top skin over on the top. And just to show you the motion we're going to carry through, we're going to always keep a focus on the side plates to make sure they look good on this portion here. And we're going to bend this around. And we're going to follow this all the way to the back. Now, our point to put tension is going to be all the way back here. And we're going to always want to be looking all over this to make sure everything looks good. If you did your job right here, this is going to lie right into place and look fantastic. All right, I feel really good about this. We got plenty of glue. I have my extra glue stick. We're going to go ahead and put this glue down. We don't want to glue this hatch down, so we're not going to slob glue all over here. We're going to go ahead and only go out maybe a 1/2 inch on each side here. So let's go ahead and start with our paper. We're going to go a nice generous drop here, keeping that nozzle right between the paper and the foam. Other side. Anytime you do it on one side, go to the other side and do it so you don't forget. Let's go ahead and put my glue stick in here. Nice healthy drop right in the front. Nice and generous. Go in, filling up that undercut. About a 1/2 inch there. Mirrored on the other side. This is where those high output glue guns really are worth their weight in gold. Same process here now. Last but not least, we're going to just do a little tab here, little tab here. All right, here we go. We're going to keep our fingers nice and clear so we don't squeeze glue out and get a blister. We're going to pull this all the way back. Now what I like to do is once this is all the way back, hold this down with my hand, kind of pushing back. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that all this is seating in nice and right where we want it. You have about 45 seconds to work with this glue once you're kind of sealing it off. So use that 45 seconds and be diligent and go all over the fuselage. Sometimes if you make a twist or adjustment one place, it'll cause something to move somewhere else. You can even take a scrap piece of foam if you want. If you don't want to burn your fingers, just kind of run it over and use that to hold things together. While I'm checking this over, I'm keeping constant pressure pulling back on this back section right here. A lot of times you wish that 2 minutes would go faster. This is the one time that you wish that 2 minutes would go very slow. But when you're done and you're taking your time, you end up with a very beautiful center section. Now that everything's dried, we're going to go ahead and take our square or a ruler, and we're just going to use this as a reference. And we're not going to cut down deep into the foam below this. We're only going to go through the top surface here. Release here. Same process on the other side. Now the goal of this design was to get you as much cargo space as possible. So we changed this about 3 or 4 times to really try to make that happen. And the end result is a very wide open cavity. While this is open, let's go ahead and do some dress up. This is a simple fold over for decoration and also rigidity. We're going to put a nice little piece of, a nice little bead of glue, rotate that down 90 degrees. And if we have to, we'll just put a little bit more glue on there. Rotate it down. And I like to kind of squeegee that out. Once again, the paper passes the heat through really easy, so I always try to use a scrap piece whenever possible. You can see this whole area is long. We're not going to cut this flush. We're going to take this razor blade and we're just going to go through the foam. Once we have these little etch marks, we're going to crack this in half, and then this portion here is going to get peeled away very carefully. Try to keep this all in one solid piece and become foldovers for strength. All right, so now that we have this portion here cut, let's go ahead and put a nice healthy bead of glue. Same process as we did dressing up the other areas. We're gonna fold this over, count to 10, kind of keep that paper moving, and then roll it down, count to 10 again. Same process over here. Down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then down, squeegee this up. If you need a little more hot glue, no big deal. This is really aesthetic with a little bit of structure tied in. That looks good. Let's go ahead and just take these straight down and hold it flat. If you have to, let's get this nice and flush. There we go. So for these side plates, let's go ahead and just put a nice healthy bead right here. Take our scrap piece. I'll just work it down right to the bottom and hold it there till it dries. Same process on the other side. Down. Now that we have the back corners and everything dressed up back here, let's go ahead and get some rigidity in these areas right here, so when this is folded over, it doesn't get spongy in these corners. To do this, we're going to go ahead and take these rectangles in our kit. Now these are cut a little bit longer than they need to be, and that's okay, because we're going to cut them the size right now. Now on this front one, we want this to actually go a little bit further, so go ahead and just remove about a ½ inch. You can kind of give this a little bit of a curl if you want in the front. Quick little test fit. And we're going to let this kind of push right up against the sides and leave about a ¼ inch out right here. Once you're happy with that fit, I'm going to go ahead and just do a little bit of an L and then put it back inside. And the most important thing is that we just hold it up against this top, so it's a nice tight fit. Give this about 30 seconds to dry and we can move on to the other pieces. We're just putting a little bit of a curve there just to kind of match this. I don't like to peel this because if I peel this, it's going to cause it to be a little bit weaker. Now for the back ones, all we need to do, just run this up against the back, take our knife and cut a little bit of a notch. And because this doesn't have the doubler, I'm not going to push this all the way against the edge. I'm just going to match that width up with the other piece. this side. Just trim this a little bit shorter. There's a hinge area over here that eventually with enough use is going to get weaker. So what I like to do is just to make a simple glue hinge. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and lightly put a light ribbon right on this side right here. And then I'm going to take a scrap piece of foam and I'm going to smear it smooth. If you guys have ever done hot glue hinges where we reinforce it, it's just the exact same. The only difference is we're working on a blunt edge, not a V groove. Once that dried, it'll be nice and reinforced and make that hinge a lot stronger. Now that we have this in, you can see when we close this, it's a very nice solid fit all around. But one thing is going to be is when we lift this up, eventually these areas are going to get kind of worn out. So to make this a little bit stronger, I'm going to take some 2-inch packing tape and leaving about 2 inches on this side. I'm going to go ahead and lightly lay this tape down and let the curve remain just like that. And then I'll just cut this about a 1/2 inch from the back. And then this can fold right over our existing hinge, make it even stronger. And then you'll see for a reason later, but I'm going to leave this kind of pulled around and bring this up on the other side. Go and do the exact same process on the other side. Because this water resistant foam is so durable, we want to go ahead and take precautions like this to make this plane last a long time. To keep this hatch from flopping up, you could always just put tape on this, and if you're scratch building at home and cutting these pieces out by hand, you certainly can do that. But if you want to use these pieces here that we included in our speed build kit, and also this whole plank here is available as an item on our store that you can use, so even if you're scratch building, you can get all these pieces precision cut. We're going to go ahead and pop out these pieces that you see. Now if anyone remembers hot rods in the hoods of cars, they have like a little loop that pops up. And I really like the look of that, but also the functionality. So what we have here is a little tab that's going to pop up through the hatch, and then this little keeper that's going to slide through. And of course, it's going to go in the direction of the wind. It's going to stay in there because the friction of the hatch is going to push up on it. So let's go ahead and make an adjustment here. We're going to go ahead and glue these in. So this area right here is going to be the area that I want to put it in. We're going to keep this just below the surface as you see right here and glue it right in the center. Want to work quick anytime you put hot glue onto wood because it dries really quick that way. There's one, and here's two. All right, now that our little tabs are nice and dry and hard, we're gonna go ahead and flip this over, and we're gonna go ahead and pull this as tight as we can, and then right where the tabs are, we're gonna just kind of force it down so it kind of presses in there. Rock it back and forth so you get the full size that you need of the hatch, and when we flip it over, it's very hard to see, but right here, we can see that very easily that that's where our hatch needs to be cut out. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove the foam in that area right to the other side. There's one side. Now anytime that you're wrapping the noses, it's really hard to get a perfect fit. So it's just easier to do these cuts when you're building it as you build so you can get a nice custom fit. Push this back through. All right, so if we did everything right, should be able to slide this down, and then this pops right on through, and this will keep your hatch down nice and tight. One quick tip, if you don't want to lose these pieces, just tape a little piece of, or hot glue a little piece of string to the actual hatch, and that way when you pop these off, they just stick to your hatch. At this point, the center section of your spear is now done. We're ready to move on to the next step, which is the elevons. In this portion of the build, we're going to be installing our elevons, installing our servos, putting in our control horns and push rods. With these elevons, things are a little bit different than the typical way we've done it. If anyone's ever built a Kraken before, we oftentimes would just take a piece of tape and actually do a tape hinge. The problem is this stuff is so nice and slippery, it's very easy for tape to release, and also it doesn't look very nice because you always see that gap there. Our solution to this is going to be this score cut here. So our first step that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and lightly crease this and remove the foam from this portion of the elevon. So this portion here is going to go away. Take your time and just work this off very slow. Make sure you're peeling it from the part that needs to release and not from your main elevon. If a little bit does release, don't worry about that because we can always come back with glue and fix that later. Because this wing can easily be propped up to go very, very fast, it's going to be really important that our elevon is nice and strong. So we're going to go ahead and do this on both sides. So our next step is we're going to be applying this 2-inch tape here. And what I like to do is I like to apply it just ahead or just to about where we actually ripped off the foam itself. Just tack it down with your finger. Once you got it tacked down, we can flip this over and push it nice and flat. While it's on its back, let's go ahead and cut off both sides. When we flip this over, you're going to see it's very evident that it only goes one way. But if you've never built before, this is going to be for your control horn, and your control horn is going to line up almost with your servo horn. Favoring the inside of the wing, we're going to give this about an 1/8 inch or about 3 millimeters gap. Right about there. So what we basically done is made a barn door hinge that you can see right here. When I flip this over, you're going to see that this non-beveled elevon meets up nice and flush with the trailing edge of the wing. That's exactly what we want to do. And we don't want to cut this beveled edge because we're going to do kind of a unique new step here. This is a new technique, and if you guys are scratch building or designing, you guys can also incorporate this into your designs to make a very strong elevon if you have to have your aileron or elevon as a separate piece. Now, 2 ways we can do this. We could use hot glue and just smear a nice bit of hot glue along here and then smooth that out. But also, this foam board and this paper takes instant glue very well. So what I'm going to do in this technique is I'm actually going to be using this medium viscosity instant glue. This is mercury. You guys can use pretty much any instant glue you want. It works really, really well. The key is not to put on too much because we're going to be smearing this very, very thin. So I'm going to be taking this down. Just a nice, just like it was hot glue. And then when I flip this over, you can actually see it kind of protrude through here. And I'm going to smear this out. Now, if you're using this craft foam board or some different foam board, always test this out, and it's not a bad idea to practice this before you do it. But I really like the idea of using instant glue to adhere the 2 pieces of paper together. Once you're happy with that fit and you've smeared it out nice and thin, fold it over 180 degrees and press down nice and hard to keep everything flush. Give this about a minute to dry. All right. Now that we have this area nice and glued tight, now we're going to treat this as if these 2 pieces were always together and go back to our roots. So what we need to do is we need to cut a single bevel on the elevon side. And as we described before, we're going to keep that blade nice in an acute angle, keeping one side just above the paper and the other side about a 45-degree in. All right, to reinforce this even more, we're going to do a hot glue hinge. So let's go ahead and cut ourselves a piece of scrap. And we're going to place the nozzle of the glue gun right at the edge here. Nice thin ribbon all the way down the middle. And then just what we put on, we're going to take off. The goal is to really work this into the paper and the foam so at the end you have a nice film coating everything. At this point, we're going to go ahead and let this sit. You can see it's nice and bouncy, and let it dry. All right, one elevon's done. We're going to do the exact same process on the other side. Now that our elevons are on, we can move on to installing our servos, push rods, and control horns. So now's the point where we're going to go ahead and install our servos. Make sure that your control arm is as close to the servo as possible. We're going to go ahead and guide this wire down in towards the center spar. Now there's a couple holes in the center spar that we're going to be able to reach down through with a pair of needle nose and grab our cable without having to use anything to really snag it with. There we go. Let's just go ahead and drop that down in here for now. Now included in our kit are 2 push rods. These push rods are plenty long where you could almost do this twice over, so if you mess up, don't worry too badly. Along in our kit, we also have these control horns. Now for this plank, since I had extra real estate and also since this elevon is so wide, I went ahead and made this control horn a little bit longer. But this dimension here is the exact same as our classic 20 count control horns that we use so often. So don't worry if you don't have this. I just figured since we had the extra real estate, we might as well use it. So let's go ahead and press this down. And you can see that I'm kind of holding the back end of it here just for a quick test fit. Now we can go ahead and guide our push rod from the inside pointing out on the very top hole. Now it's a good idea here, all wings have a little bit of reflex. We have a little gauge over here that's going to help us with kind of getting that all figured out. What I like to do is hold this gauge up here and with my other hand pull this taunt up against it, and we're going to go to the middle hole. Now if you're flying a lot of AP and you're flying really smooth flight, not really racing or getting maneuverable, you can go all the way in the inside most hole, but I'm actually going to be doing a little bit of maneuverability and a little bit of AP, so I'm going to go into the center one. Once we have that center one marked, we're going to go ahead and bend straight down and then go about 3 millimeters in and bend straight out. Once we're happy with where that fits, you can go ahead and cut it loose. By the way, Kevin, thank you for the side cuts. I've been using these for the past 4 years now. We didn't glue this in because now what we can do is we can very easily snake this through. Rotate it, and come back. Now the reason why I didn't want to glue any of this down is we still have a little bit of adjustment on this front end here, and also we're going to be fastening this down, so it's going to give a little bit of an up. So if it's a little bit off, you still have some adjustment luxury right here. If you're not happy with the fit, go ahead and make another one. So just to check, it's right where we want it. Now that we're happy with this, we can lift this up. Put some glue underneath on each little wing there. Press it down in. And what I like to do is just put a little bubble of glue over the top of the cavity and fill that up. Go ahead and let that dry in about 1.5 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and glue down our control horn and do one final check for the proper reflex. For this, I'm going to go ahead and fill this cavity up with a piece of glue. You're going to notice this is 3/32 plywood, and also since they're sit there, I'm going to put it back there because I know that's going to glue that control horn in nice and tight. Press that down in. Just take a little piece of scrap, scrape off any excess on the bottom. And once you're happy with that fit and the reflex, leave it alone. Now this is all dry, we're going to go ahead and reinforce this, because right now if this was going to bend up, you could see that it would do this. And whenever you design something, especially something going fast, it's always a good idea to have it pull to positive. In other words, when this pulls the wire, it's automatically pushing up. But in some cases, you're going to be going very fast while being inverted, and you want this to be able to be rigid pushing down, and also for banking. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and zip tie this right in the middle. We're going to pull that zip tie almost tight enough where it still guides free, but it doesn't have any slop really this way. Just on one side, right in this middle section, I'm just going to put a little puncture hole, a little twisting motion, and now I can go ahead and cut this at an angle in case there's anything else additional I have to punch through, and we'll just do a quick test fit. This is the exact same process that we did on the arrow, so if you built the arrow, this is going to be very comfortable for you. I'm going to go back in, I'm going to fill this cavity and pump it full with a nice generous amount of hot glue. And without getting anything in by the wire and the zip tie, I'm going to hold this down in here. Hold this down for a good minute, 1.5 minutes, just to make sure everything thoroughly dries. So now just to kind of give you an indicator here, when this is pushing and pulling and I move this, you can see that no motion is lost. All of it is transitioned right to the servo, and that's exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and do the exact same process on the other side. Our elevons and ailerons are now installed along with their servos. We're ready to move on to the next step, which is the power pod. In this portion of the build, we're going to be installing our power pod, making sure our motors spin in the proper direction, making all our connections, getting our elevons working the proper way, and dialing in our dual rates, along with routing our receiver. Our first step to installing the power pod is to go ahead and pull this out. And once again, to confirm, if you haven't checked the rotation, if you're using a standard counterclockwise prop and pusher configuration, you're going to want to make sure the motor spins in a way that loosens the motor mount. If you have the ability or you have access to the reverse prop, make sure it spins in a way that's going to naturally tighten the bolt. That's the preferred way. We're going to put this aside because we got to make a cavity fit for it. That cavity is going to be located on the very back of the wing right here. You can see on our hatch here, these two inside guides. We're simply going to go ahead and cut straight down to the very bottom of this plate and knock this notch out. What I like to do is just kind of pop it right ahead of it, right here, and just kind of wander on down to the bottom. Just one half, and then we'll just flush it out on the other side. All right, while we have this cut out, we might as well go ahead and do a test fit. These little notches that I wanted you guys to keep in the back, that's because these notches are going to line up with here. Just go slide this down in, and then give it a nice test fit. A couple routing options you do have. If you don't need airflow over this, you can route this down internally and have your ESC sitting right here, and then have your battery cable coming out the side. Problem with this is ESCs do like to get hot, and this isn't really good for service. So what I'm going to do is push these inside this cavity, which we have plenty of room, and mount my ESC just like you see right here. We'll drop a hot glue, or you can use double-sided tape if you want. Set it right down in. Now to make sure that we keep this area clear, I'm just going to put a little tiny drop of hot glue on this back edge right here. That's going to go ahead and keep the wires from getting in my way, but if I ever do need to service them, all I need to do is break that loose. You can also poke two little holes and use zip ties if you wish. Now that's glued down nice and tight, we can go ahead and do one last test fit where we're going to route everything through. Click into these front notches, make sure it sits down nice and flush. You're going to see it pops out about 1/8 of an inch. That's so I can trace this with hot glue and get a nice tight bond. Now that we've test fitted and we're happy, we can leave it right where it's at. Nice long bead on both sides. Anytime you're working with an undercut and you're putting glue on where the undercut is from the laser, just be a little extra generous with the glue. Pass it in, then press it on down. Give this about 1.5 minutes to dry. Now that's glue dried, we can follow up with a little bit of reinforcement on both sides. Scrape off any excess you have with a scrap piece of foam. At this point, we can put our attention towards routing everything. Now we only have 3 wires to work on. If you're going to be doing something with autonomy or a long-range system, things like that, you're going to have a little bit more involved. And look for a future video where we're working with the Vector to show you how to do all those great features that we talked about in the video. For this one, we're going to set up as a simple line of sight / FPV platform. All right, first things, when we're hooking up our receiver, we're going to take special note where our minus is. In this case, it's on the very bottom. Number 1 is our throttle. And I always forget which one is which, so we're just going to plug it in. If we're backwards, I'll show you how to make it right. Number 2 gets an elevon, and number 3 gets an elevon. Ideally, this section here, if you have something like an ACE32 board or a control board, this is right in the center of CG for you where you can mount this. And if you have a standard space board like an ACE32, it'll mount in here just beautifully, and you can even kick your receiver over to the side where you have access, but it's out of the way. All right, let's go ahead and power this on. We always make sure that our props are off whenever we power something on. Now that we have power, we can go ahead and check our throw deflection here. One thing that we're going to want to make sure is when we pull back on the stick, both elevons go up. You can see that's backwards. And when we go right, we want the right elevon to go right. That's correct. Now in this case, no matter what you reverse, it's not going to work out. So what we need to do is we need to go in here and we need to swap out channel 2 and 3. All right, let's try this again here. So we pull back, we go up, we have right, and we have left. At this point, we can go back to our little reflex gauge, hold this on, and make sure it's still good. You may have to get a little trim depending on how your CG is, if you're nose heavy or tail heavy. Both of those are perfect. Now we can grab another little gauge that's on the plans and also in our kit, and we can go ahead and check out our high rates and low rates. So right there, if we leave everything 100%, you can see we have high rates. If we flip this around and we want very, very smooth flight at high speeds, we're going to flip it to low rates. And to do this, we're going to go into our dual rates and adjust it. I always like to run about 40% expo on high rates and low rates when I'm flying a flying wing. That makes things nice and soft. All right, our motor activates. We're ready to move on to our next step. Now that we have the elevons working properly, we're going to go ahead and route our receiver. Now you can do this by dropping this whole area in this here and then routing your wires. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go ahead and tuck both wires back through this rear cavity. And because I have diversity, and if you are flying FPV, I'd strongly recommend having diversity on your wing. I'm going to route one wire right down the tunnel, pointing straight out towards the wingtip. And the other wire, I'm going to route towards the back and just clip in this area right here. So now that we have our receiver routed and everything's working good, we're going to go and move our receiver back, and we're going to run a diversity receiver. One wire is going to go down into the channel where the spar is and point out towards the wingtip. The other wire, we're going to go ahead and route right up on the edge here, right by the hatch, going nice and vertical. Make sure this isn't too long to where it can go back and hit your prop. In this portion of the build, we're going to be installing our wingtips. Now for the wingtip, we're going to go ahead and remove the excess surface on the top portion of the wing, as you see right here, with a sharp knife. Go ahead and glide this down, keeping your knife pressed against the bottom piece of the wing, and take a couple swipes through until it's nice and flush. Go ahead and take a test fit with the wing, and you'll notice this etch line on the wingtip. This etch line is going to go in line with the bottom surface of the wing that's currently facing up. That looks good. Put a healthy bead of glue so we have a little time to work with this. And with the etch line meeting up with the bottom surface, we're going to line this up, and I'm going to leave about a ½ inch in the front. Right about there. Once we have the position desired, we can go ahead and lay it back on the table. Hold this position for about a good minute and a half. Make sure everything's really tight and solid. Once it's thoroughly dried, we're going to do the exact same process on the other side. Your wingtips are now done. We're ready to move on to our next step. In this portion of the build, we're going to be assembling our plywood FPV pod and cutting it in the nose and installing it. To put together our FPV pod, we wanted to pop out the remaining pieces that we have in our hardware kit. So these holes right here could do a lot of unique things. They can hold down a run cam, a GoPro, or a session. Now we're going to go ahead and pop these out all carefully. But if you're going to be using a GoPro specifically, you're going to want to be careful about how you mount this and how you assemble this piece. Reason being is if you mount it backwards, your flying camera and your GoPro lenses are going to be far apart from each other. So here's your GoPro. Here's how it's going to strap in. You want this so this is going to be facing, if you're facing towards it, to your left, or if you're behind it, to your right. That way, when you have your board camera mounted, your GoPro and your board camera as close as possible, and this even favors a little bit more center so you have the best flight experience and recording. Now that we've established which way we want our board to be mounted, we're going to go ahead and just do a quick dry fit assembly on the bottom piece. We're happy with that. So we're going to take our instant glue, and on the lower flats, we're going to put a nice thin bead as if we're hot gluing it. Nice quick trip. If you have accelerator, mist it down over top of your piece of wood that you're going to be mating it to. And press it into place. Hold this for about 30 seconds to a minute. Right now would be a great time to do a test fit. We're going to go ahead and line up our 2 notches, back one first, and then rotate it down in for a nice flush fit. Once we're happy with that fit, we can carefully rock it apart. Going back to putting glue on the lower flats again. Switching our other piece with some accelerator. And following the exact same process as before. Hold it down. Rock it into place. We're going to repeat the exact same process on the other side. Always do a test fit to make sure everything fits properly before putting glue down. Now just to give this added rigidity, once it's all glued together, I like to float a thin bead of glue right down on these edges. Just hit it with a little accelerator. Now we're ready to mount it into the plane. Now I typically like to keep this removable, so I don't really glue it into the fuselage because the friction fits so well. But now would be a really good time to go ahead and feed this through. So if you're doing a session, obviously it's going to be using the side plates along with the run cam. But for the GoPro, I'm going to go ahead and feed this down through the back. And this strap is included in your kit as well. We're going to feed it up through the front. Yep. Now we can feed it through the back. Now we can slide our run cam in and lock it down. This gives you plenty of room right here for your board cam. Let's go ahead and remove our GoPro, and we can get ready to fit it inside. So we know generally that this is going to be located right around in the middle, somewhere around here, but we don't know exactly where. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and take our knife, and we're going to go down well below where we know it needs to be. We're going to punch it through flat, and I'm just going to carry it over sideways with a little slide motion until I hit a stop. Once I feel that stop, I'm not going to go any further. I'm going to go around the other direction, hit a stop. Now what I can do is I can go about 1/4 inch on the inside. I'm going to just carry this right down, not too far, just to where the nose starts going around, and I can open this up. Now I can go ahead and look down inside, hit the stop, hit the stop. Once again, I'm going to kind of go a little bit on the inside, so I'm not really taking any chances. I'm going to open this cavity up completely now. At this point, I can see everything I need to cut, and I can go back through and ride right up against the edge. Just whittle this out until it's nice and smooth. For this front piece, I don't want to go up too far, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take my square or a ruler, and I'm going to go ahead and keep this just above and put a nice cut right along here, nice and straight. We can always go lower, but we can never go higher. So just go just about to where the furthest point on the outside is and make a nice straight cut right there. Now we can go ahead and test fit our piece. So now's the time when we're going to go and test fit. Now this is going to be a very, very tight fit. So don't go ahead and just push it in one thing, in one motion. Go ahead and start it from the very top, and with a rocking motion, go ahead and just slowly ease it down until the top surface and the sides are flush. Just like that. Now at its current state, there's no way it's going to fly out, but if you would like to glue it down, go ahead and just smear a bead of glue around the outer perimeter, so if you do have to remove it later, you easily can do so. We're now ready to install our props, get our CG, and take her out for a Maiden. So to get proper CG, what we want to do is we want to load it up the exact way we're going to fly it. So at this point, put all the gear, put the props, put your GoPros on to make sure you can get your CG where it needs to be. The next time that this turns on, we'll be outside ready to Maiden it. And we're also going to go ahead and put our GoPro on. So for this one, I don't have any FPV gear on it. We're going to be flying at line of sight, so I don't need to really worry about anything else. We can install that later. So So now when I hold this up, it should be pretty naturally balanced, but you're gonna notice it's just a touch tail heavy. This is gonna give us a couple options. If we wanna go long range, we can put 2 parallel batteries on both sides here and here. Show what it looks like on the other side. So for 2 battery setup, we would slide this in on both sides here and here. We can also fit 2 batteries paralleled here and here, but in general, right about here is the magic spot. So if you're flying a 2200 3 or 4 cell, go ahead and put a strip right down the middle and you'll be good to go. Look for future episodes showing how to put vector systems, FPV gear, and getting this all tuned up. We're going to cover that in a later episode, but we do have really good content from the past that'll help guide you through this. I'm just going to cut this loose. So we're going to go about 3 inches forward from the back firewall, so 3 inches from this point forward. And what we want to see is a slight nose tipping down. It's really hard to balance a wing, but as long as you see it balancing level or slight nose down, you're in good shape. It's always better to test fly a plane with a little bit of nose weight favoring forward than tail weight. We are now ready to take it outside and maiden it. All right, we are all set up. Now, if this is your first maiden, we're gonna have a link below. 6 quick tips for a successful first flight. They'll give you all the basics to kind of double check and go over to make sure you have the best odds of having a good experience. Let's go ahead and get her up and see what happens. Feels great. Let's check out inverted here. How much zoom do you have, Dave? How much zoom? How small is it up here? Slow her down here. Nice thing about this plane is I really love how it slows down. And when you have the CG right and you point her into the wind, you're gonna notice there's almost no stall whatsoever. All right, let's go ahead and bring her in. There we are. All right, friends, I want to thank you for watching. Thank you for being part of the Flight Test family. And if you want to build this, once again, there's free plans linked down below, and there's also the speed build kit in our store. This is a great plane to build, whether it's a first-time wing or whether you want to go for a long-range machine. All right, we'll see you next time.